okay. I'm not okay. I'm not. I want to catch them all. Not some of them. I want to catch them all.
27 Pokemon Controversies, 7 levels. Everybody wants to catch them all, but not all of them are worth catching. We'll start with some pretty common controversies and then delve deeper into some truly disturbing scandals you'll wish you never heard of. And I know just where to start. Tip of the iceberg? I choose you. Level 1. Missing No glitch. In Pokemon Red and Blue, there's a strange glitch that kind of feels almost like a ghost in the machine, a fragment of code that was never meant to be discovered. It was called Missing No. To encounter this glitch, players had to perform a specific sequence. Talk to the old man in Viridian City who demonstrates how to catch a Pokemon. Then fly to Cinnabar Island and surf along its eastern shore. Seems simple enough, but then out of nowhere, something strange appeared. A garbled block of pixels shaped like an L or sometimes fossils, sprites, or even a ghostly figure. Whatever it was, it had absolutely no explanation. But then, the player would discover the effects of encountering Missing No. The 6th item in the player's inventory would multiply by 128, a boost for those seeking rare items like Master Balls or rare candies. But it came with a serious and uncomfortable trade-off. The game's graphics would become scrambled, with sprites warping into unrecognizable forms, and the Hall of Fame data becoming permanently corrupted, turning what should have been a triumphant record into a chaotic mess of glitchy symbols. It wasn't just a visual glitch, it felt like the game itself was unraveling as a result of encountering this thing. Obviously, Nintendo had to respond, but they did so in the most cryptic way. In Nintendo Power magazine, they warned players to avoid Missing No, describing it as a programming quirk that could cause the game to behave strangely or even require restarting from scratch. But they gave the entire directions of how to make it happen, so the warning didn't deter players whatsoever, it just fueled their curiosity to find it more and more. Guides on how to find Missing No spread like wildfire, and some even sold tips for profit. Now, the glitch itself was harmless. Most glitches could be fixed by resetting the console, so this one was pretty easy to solve, unlike some others that we'll get to soon. Ultra Beasts resemble Lovecraftian eldritch horrors. The Ultra Beasts in Pokémon Sun and Moon are some of the most unsettling creatures ever introduced to the franchise, that much is for sure. These creatures have designs and origins which are constructed to evoke a unique sense of dread that has been compared to the deeply disturbing creations of H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft's eldritch horrors were not just aliens, but some inexplicable other beings, defying the natural order in ways that make them deeply disturbing, and that's exactly what Pokémon embraced. Take Nihilego, for example, a creature resembling a jellyfish but with no discernible face or relatable features. Its translucent body and star-like patterns suggest something cosmic, while its behavior is way more parasitic. It merges with humans and amplifies their darkest impulses. Now, Nihilego's venom doesn't control its host, but it strips away any human inhibition, leaving only raw, unfiltered desires. It's not evil in a conventional sense, it simply exists, indifferent to the chaos it causes, much like Lovecraft's outer gods. It was built to cause chaos. The Ultra Beast's origin story begins with their creation in Ultra Space. The Ultra Space dimension is a chaotic realm of warped physics and alien landscapes, completely detached from any kind of human understanding. The environments are bizarre, hostile, and utterly foreign. Kind of like the Pokémon themselves, actually. Guzzlord, for example, lives in Ultra Ruin, a desolate world filled with toxic waste and remnants of civilization, acting as a grim reminder of humanity's insignificance. Guzzlord consumes everything in its path without malice or purpose, which totally aligns with Lovecraft's consistent theme of unstoppable destruction by an indifferent being. The developers intentionally avoided traditional Pokémon aesthetics to create these creatures and their world, creating beings that feel invasive and unnatural. The Ultra Beasts are basically unknowable forces from beyond our reality, indifferent to human morality or survival. And that's what makes them feel so undeniably creepy. Pokémon Vietnamese Crystal's creepy translation errors. Pokémon Vietnamese Crystal is an infamous bootleg of Pokémon Crystal that gained notoriety for one thing and one thing alone: its chaotic, nonsensical translation. Reportedly, the game's text was translated from Japanese to Chinese, then to English, resulting in a linguistic disaster that left players feeling very, very uncomfortable. From the moment players are greeted with, "Welcome, it's Elf's World," it's clear this is no ordinary Pokémon journey. See, what's happened is that the word Pokémon is mistranslated as elf, and trainers are referred to as coaches, immediately creating a surreal disconnect where there are elf coaches. Items like potions become drugs, and picking one up might prompt the game to exclaim, "Drug bag f***," which, well, that's obviously not something Nintendo would be on board with. The dialogue from these gets worse and much darker, with characters spouting lines like, "Don't serve the devil," and Silver declaring his disgust for the trashy man, a mistranslation of his disdain for weakness. His rant escalates into a tirade about unpardonable righteous fellows and trash strolling, which honestly feels like his deeply suppressed rage is erupting. It's weird. Even mundane interactions turn sinister. NPCs ask cryptic questions like, "Is your monster fine?" or offer advice such as, "Throw the butt casually." Honestly, I could do an entire video on these lines alone. The constant mistranslations just strip away all of the cozy charm of the Pokémon world, leaving it with this weirdly hostile feeling. The game's tone becomes almost dystopian, with frequent references to death or destruction. Level 2. Cubone's tragic backstory. As a Pokémon, Cubone is adorable, frankly. A cute little thing with a quirky skull on his head. Adorable! Well, if you're into that kind of thing. But once you start scratching the surface, you discover that the lore behind it is tragic, to say the least. In case you don't already know this, Cubone is a small dinosaur-like creature that clutches a bone and wears the skull of its deceased mother as a helmet. Now, this isn't a choice or a family tradition, it's survival. Sure, the skull shields Cubone's vulnerable head from attacks, but it also serves as a constant reminder of the loss this poor thing has suffered having lost its mother. And what's worse, every Cubone carries this burden, and its cries at night echo through the hollowed remains of the skull, producing a mournful sound described as one of the saddest in Pokémon lore. Cubone is said to howl at the full moon, drawn to its pale glow because it resembles its dead mother's face. This act of grief is so visceral that it attracts predators like Mandibuzz, who hunt Cubone and use its bones as decorations, which is horrific, but, well, it's definitely realistic. The Pokédex entries suggest an even darker layer to all of this tragedy. The Cubone's evolution is tied to acceptance of this grief. Cubone evolves into Marowak only when it comes to terms with the pain of its mother's death, a cruel rite of passage. That implies that every Cubone must experience this loss to survive. So every single Cubone has a dead mother, and every Cubone's existence is defined by loneliness and mourning, making it easily one of the most tragic figures in Pokémon mythology. Dark Pokédex entries. Obviously, the Pokémon franchise is seen as colorful and child-friendly, which it largely is, but there are aspects of the lore that are dark, disturbing even in parts. Drifloon, for instance, appears as an innocent balloon Pokémon, something that could easily appeal to children, which is exactly what it wants. The Pokédex entry reveals that Drifloon lures children with its playful appearance, tugging on their hands before leading them away, never to be seen again.
Drifloon, the balloon Pokémon, a ghost and flying type. Drifloon grabbed children's hands as if they were going to guide them to the ghost world.
Its round body is said to be stuffed with souls, growing larger with each victim it claims. So this balloon is a literal child abductor. And so much more. It's hard to get more disturbing than a Pokémon kidnapping kids. Then there's Shedinja, a lifeless husk formed during Nincada's evolution. Its hollow body is believed to steal the spirit of anyone who dares peer into the void on its back.
Shedinja, the Shed Pokémon. Shedinja possesses a hard, powerful body, giving it strong defenses.
It doesn't move or twitch, which honestly just makes it all the more unsettling. It's just waiting for people to blindly walk into its trap. Dusclops is similar, described as a hollow entity like a black hole absorbing anything into its body with no hope of escape.
Dusclops, the Beacon Pokémon. Dusclops is said to be able to suck practically anything into its body, the black hole-like core of which is completely empty.
That means endless torment within its void-like form. Not a good ending for anybody, right? And just to round this joyful section out, we have to talk about Litwick, a deceptively cheerful candle Pokémon. This thing pretends to guide people with its light, but instead drains their life force to fuel its flame.
Litwick, the candle Pokémon. Litwick appear to be helping to guide the way of people by illuminating areas that are darkened. But in reality, they are actually leading them to the ghost world.
Litwick leads lost children not to safety, but to the spirit world. Or worse, consumes them entirely. It literally thrives on death. So yes, not all Pokémon are good for kids. Team Plasma's animal rights parody. In Pokémon Black and White, we meet Team Plasma, the antagonistic group that provides our main obstacle throughout the game. But they're clearly designed to be a parody of animal rights movements, particularly those with extreme or militant approaches. Their core mission in the game is to liberate Pokémon from their trainers through any means necessary, which is not all that different from real-world organizations like PETA, which believes animals should be free always. At first glance, Team Plasma's cause seems noble, right? They argue that capturing Pokémon and forcing them into battles is exploitative, likening it to animal cruelty. Hard to disagree with that kind of argument. Their leader, Getsis, delivers some impassioned speeches that resonate with the crowds, even convincing some characters in the game to reconsider their relationships with Pokémon. But then the truth starts to unravel. Despite their claims of wanting to free Pokémon, they use their own Pokémon in battles to achieve their goals, a blatant act of hypocrisy. Early in the game, they violently kick a defenseless Munna, a baby Pokémon, during a public confrontation. It's an act of cruelty that betrays their stated mission and suggests they're much darker than they appear. Their methods escalate as they steal Pokémon from their trainers indiscriminately, regardless of whether those trainers treat their Pokémon with love and care. This is something that has happened in real life too, with some activists from these organizations punishing other people to achieve their goals no matter the cost. The most unsettling revelation comes when it's exposed that Getsis never intended to liberate Pokémon at all. His speeches and manipulation of his followers were part of a grand scheme to consolidate power by becoming the sole individual controlling all of the Pokémon. That's a pretty dark outcome, right? If you love these videos, why not hold down and B and hit that subscribe button to add a new channel to your party. I swear it increases your odds of catching us. Level 3. Pokémon Buried Alive Creepypasta. Pokémon creepypastas are especially creepy for some reason, possibly because of how tied this franchise is to our childhood. But the Buried Alive creepypasta is one of the most sinister I have ever read. Supposedly Buried Alive was a character intended to be the final boss of the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town. He was said to be a zombie-like creature that rose from the ground to challenge players in battle. The encounter begins with chilling dialogue. "You're here. I'm trapped, and I'm lonely. So very lonely. Won't you join me?" That's a lot more sinister and creepy than what you usually get from Pokémon dialogue, right? It feels very different from the usual lighthearted, cozy themes you get from these games. Buried Alive's team consisted of Muck, Gengar, and 2 White Hands, which were decayed, disembodied hands with grotesque details that went far beyond the pixelated limitations of early Pokémon games. If players lost the battle with Buried Alive, they were greeted by a horrifying sequence. Buried Alive would utter, "Finally, fresh meat," before dragging the player character underground, but it didn't stop there. The game over screen was said to depict Buried Alive devouring Ash, accompanied by a distorted version of Lavender Town's already haunting theme. For 3 minutes, players were forced to stare at this gruesome image as the game deleted their save file, rendering the entire playthrough useless. Even if the player won against Buried Alive, they got no relief. The game would freeze entirely, leaving players stuck in a totally unplayable state. This deliberate soft-locking made it clear that there was simply no way to encounter Buried Alive and escape unscathed. He would always win. Yamask's tragic origin. Yamask is another one of Pokemon's most unsettling creations, a ghost-type Pokemon with a backstory that feels ripped straight out of a horror story. According to its Pokemon Black Pokédex entry, Yamask carries a mask that was once its human face. And that isn't a metaphor, it's the literal face it had in life, now transformed into some creepy little prop. And just in case you think that isn't so disturbing, this thing retains all of its memories from its former life. It remembers being human and sometimes gazes at its mask, crying in grief for what it has lost. Okay, now that is sinister. Now we see that Yamask isn't just a ghost, but a trapped soul cursed to wander ruins and cemeteries mourning the loss of its humanity. Okay, so it's a tragic Pokemon. We've seen a few of those. But then we get into something far more sinister. Because if someone dares to wear the mask it carries, Yamask possesses them, taking control of their body to do whatever it wants to do. But then we get deeper with Galarian Yamask. Instead of this one carrying a mask, it's tethered to a clay tablet marked with cursed engravings. The Pokédex notes that the tablet absorbs Yamask's spirit over time, erasing its humanity completely. When this process finishes, Galarian Yamask evolves into Runerigus, a cursed stone painting that embodies torment rather than release. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Mimikyu's Deadly Curse. Mimikyu, the disguise Pokemon, is a very, very eerie mystery. Its ragged Pikachu costume hides a truth so horrifying that even a fleeting glimpse can be fatal, and that's not an exaggeration. The Pokédex warns explicitly that anyone who sees Mimikyu's true form succumbs to death or a mysterious illness.
Mimikyu, the disguise Pokemon, a ghost and fairy type. It wears a ragged head cover to look like a Pikachu, but little is known about this Pokemon. It's said that a scholar who once tried to look inside met his end.
This is not folklore. Researchers in Alola have linked sudden, unexplained deaths to encounters with Mimikyu, saying that victims have suffered cardiac arrest, suffocation, or even internal injuries, with some reportedly screaming before their demise. There is no escaping. So Mimikyu's disguise isn't just for vanity or mimicry, but an act of mercy. Beneath the costume lies a form so alien and terrifying that the sight alone is lethal. In one instance from the Pokemon anime, Meowth accidentally glimpsed Mimikyu's true appearance. His heart stopped, his spirit began to drift toward the afterlife, and only quick intervention saved him from permanent death. But Mimikyu doesn't wish to cause harm to others. It longs for companionship, disguising itself as Pikachu to be loved. Yet, its existence is inherently dangerous, and there's nothing it can do about that. It attacks mercilessly if its costume is damaged, driven by fear of exposure. Some speculate that its cursed appearance stems from its ghost typing, but no one truly knows what lies beneath the ragged cloth. It may not even be a ghost. Attempts to study it have failed. The Pokemon resists fiercely, knowing its unmasking could mean death for those nearby. Kadabra and Uri Geller lawsuit. In 2000, Uri Geller, an Israeli-British illusionist famous for his apparent ability to bend a spoon with his mind, was in a Pokémon Center store in Tokyo when a young girl approached him with a Pokémon card asking him to sign it. When he looked at the card, he was horrified. That day, he filed a lawsuit against Nintendo claiming they had modeled the Pokémon Kadabra after him without permission. Kadabra is a psychic-type Pokémon that wields a bent spoon as a symbol of its telekinetic powers, which Geller obviously saw as a blatant reference to him. He also claimed that the Pokémon's Japanese name was a clear play on his own, as Youngerer closely resembles the Japanese transliteration of Uri Geller. That, coupled with the bent spoon, convinced him that Nintendo was profiting from his brand. But just suing based on that would have been one thing. Uri Geller decided to go further. He accused Nintendo of anti-Semitism. He pointed out the star on Kadabra's forehead and the lightning bolt pattern on its body, claiming they resembled Nazi-era SS symbols. Now, this was not just a case of unauthorized likeness, but also a portrayal that vilified him as an evil occult Pokémon character. He went to the press describing what he saw as an appropriation of his identity and image twisted into this horrific new thing. His lawsuit demanded £60 million in damages and led to Kadabra's removal from the Pokémon trading card game after 2002. Even though the case was dismissed in US courts by 2003, Geller continued pursuing it internationally. For nearly 2 decades, Kadabra remained absent from Pokémon cards until 2020, when Geller suddenly publicly apologized and allowed Nintendo to use the character again, apparently no longer bothered by any of the things he had pursued for the past 20 years. Drowsy eats children's dreams. Drowsy is a Pokémon unlike any other. Standing just over 3 feet tall, its sickly yellow body and droopy eyes are more than enough to give it an unsettling appearance. But it's not the way Drowsy looks that makes it so disturbing, it's what it does. This psychic creature survives by eating dreams, and it has a particular taste for the dreams of children. In fact, according to the Pokédex entries, Drowsy rarely bothers with adults. Their dreams simply aren't sweet enough.
Drowsy, the hypnotic Pokémon. It is said to feed on the dreams of its opponents. It is also known for its powerful psychic attack.
Children, however, well, they're fair game. Their innocent, carefree minds produce the kind of fun dreams Drowsy craves. If you're already creeped out, it's about to get much worse because the process is disgusting. When Drowsy finds a sleeping victim, it uses its powers to sniff out their dreams, identifying the tastiest ones with its large nose. Then it feeds. Literally, it consumes dreams by sucking them out through the nostrils of its prey. Yeah. If your nose ever feels itchy while you sleep, you might wake up to find a Drowsy hovering over your pillow, feasting on your subconscious thoughts. Worse still, if you wake up unable to remember a particularly good dream, chances are Drowsy has already devoured it. It's all very creepy and unsettling, but the creators of Drowsy decided to push the creepiness even more. Drowsy is known to lurk near places like playgrounds and recreational centers, waiting for children who've had a joyful day. Once it finds its targets, it puts them to sleep and proceeds to harvest their dreams in silence. The Pokédex even suggests that Drowsy remembers every dream it consumes, cataloging them deep within its mind. Honestly, this has to be one of the most undeniably sinister Pokémon in the entire library. It doesn't just eat dreams, it targets the most vulnerable, children, and leaves behind no trace except an itch or an empty memory where happiness once lingered. That is dark. Level 4. Pokémon Evolution resembling eugenics. This is going to be very heavy for those who come to Pokémon for light-hearted, cozy fun, but some have noted that the concept of Pokémon evolution, while seemingly innocent, carries some seriously unsettling parallels to the principles of eugenics, the genetic modification of humans for perfection. Much like that real-world concept, in the Pokémon universe, evolution is framed as a transformation into a superior form, stronger, faster, and more capable. A Magikarp becomes a mighty Gyarados, a Caterpie metamorphoses into the majestic Butterfree. You get the idea. These changes are not gradual adaptations or evolutions, but immediate upgrades, implying that the evolved forms are inherently better, more desirable versions of their predecessors. By comparison, this is not unlike the Nazis' obsession with eugenics in World War II. Eugenics sought to engineer a better human race by promoting traits deemed superior and eradicating those considered undesirable. In Hitler's case, he wanted blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Aryan perfection. Now, Pokémon evolution is often controlled by external forces. Items like evolution stones or specific conditions like high friendship or exposure to certain environments are what help these creatures to evolve. In real life, eugenics worked in a similar way. Eugenicists manipulated human reproduction through forced sterilizations of imperfect people and selective breeding to enforce their vision of an ideal society. It was extremely messed up. But in both cases, the underlying message is clear. Some forms of life are considered more valuable than others. Pokémon that fail to evolve are often seen as weaker or less useful in battles, just as eugenics stigmatized individuals who didn't fit these pointless standards of worthiness. The idea of progression in evolution, whether in Pokémon or humans, rests on a dangerous assumption that there is a single path to perfection, which we all know is false. Lavender Town Syndrome. If there's one urban legend that has stood the test of time more than any other, it has to be Lavender Town Syndrome. This all relates to the eerie background music of Lavender Town, a location in Pokémon Red and Green released back in 1996. Lavender Town is already unnerving, with its central feature being the Pokémon Tower, this strange and creepy graveyard for deceased Pokémon, which is haunted by restless spirits. But the legend goes much deeper than what the game presents. The story goes that when the game was first released in 1996, the high-pitched tones of Lavender Town's theme caused severe physical and psychological effects in children, including headaches, insomnia, irritability, and even suicide. Reportedly, these frequencies were only audible to children due to their heightened auditory sensitivity, meaning that no adults could ever hear or recognize the alleged noises. The urban legend began circulating about a spike in suicides among Japanese children aged 7 to 12. As many as 200 children were said to have taken their own lives after playing the game and hearing the music. Those who didn't end their lives reportedly suffered from migraines, nosebleeds, or erratic behavior. Part of the reason the rumor took off was the allegations that Game Freak had experimented with binaural beats, a unique auditory illusion designed to manipulate brain activity. Those experiments had allegedly caused harm during testing, with some versions of the story claiming the Japanese government intervened, forcing Game Freak to recall the original cartridges and alter the music for international releases. The truth is that nobody knows if any of this actually happened or if it's just another legendary Pokémon creepypasta. But the idea of a game having this effect is terrifying. Hypno and child kidnapping. Hypno is one of the franchise's most unsettling creatures by quite a distance. It carries a pendulum, swinging it rhythmically to induce sleep in its targets. Now, that in itself is creepy, but not super disturbing. But when you dig deeper into the lore, it gets there. According to Pokédex entries, it feeds on dreams. Okay, pretty weird, pretty creepy.
Hypno, a hypnosis Pokémon. It carries a pendulum-like device and performs hypnotic attacks.
But it's also been recorded that this creature has, at some point, abducted a child in the Berry Forest. In fact, this incident is not portrayed as an isolated accident, but as something Hypno is capable of doing with ease. The Pokédex entry explicitly states that Hypno has been known to carry off people having good dreams. Obviously, the idea of being hypnotized, taken into the woods, and used as dream food is deeply unsettling. It's not just the act itself, but the deliberate nature of it. The fact that Hypno waits in less traveled areas, polishing its pendulum as if preparing for its next victim. This isn't some misunderstood creature, it's an active and dangerous predator. And one with a disturbingly humanoid appearance. Its sleepy eyes and large nose give it an almost caricatured human look, which somehow makes it feel even more terrifying. It blurs the line between animal and person, making its actions feel more deliberate and sinister. Once it gets you, you're done. No escape. Registeel Nazi Salute Animation. When Pokémon Diamond and Pearl launched, I doubt anybody could have predicted that there would be such a giant uproar over a single animation frame. Registeel, one of the franchise's legendary Pokémon, was depicted in its original sprite with its arm raised straight into the air. Unfortunately, many players came to view this as a kind of Nazi salute. The resemblance was unmistakable to Western audiences, particularly in Germany, where Nazi imagery is not only offensive but illegal. The controversy ignited quickly, with players questioning how a gesture like that could have slipped through development totally unnoticed. But the incident wasn't the only one. Actually, it was just the latest in a troubling history of perceived Nazi imagery in the Pokémon franchise. Years earlier, a trading card was released featuring a swastika-like symbol. Actually, it was just an Eastern religious icon that was widely misunderstood in Western markets, but the optics were too much to be ignored. There was also an anime episode where Team Rocket performed gestures eerily similar to Nazi salutes. So these moments had already painted the franchise as culturally tone-deaf in certain ways, but Registeel's pose felt more blatant. It wasn't subtle, it was there front and center in one of the series' most anticipated games. That was a problem. Debates erupted immediately, with people questioning whether this was a careless oversight or something more sinister. Some argued that it was a simple cultural misunderstanding, not unlike what happened with the trading card symbol situation. But not everybody was this forgiving. The backlash grew loud enough for Nintendo to act swiftly. For the European release, Registeel's sprite was redrawn with its arm lowered to avoid any semblance of the salute. This revised sprite became standard in all future games, starting with Pokémon Platinum, totally erasing the original pose from the franchise's library. Level 5. Pokémon Unite Pay-to-Win Backlash. When Pokémon Unite launched in July 2021, fans were extremely excited to get a new game set within the Pokémon universe. But that excitement didn't last long. The game introduced held items, which could be equipped to Pokémon to boost stats and provide significant in-game advantages. But these items weren't just temporary power-ups, they could be permanently upgraded using item enhancers, an in-game currency. The catch? Obviously, item enhancers could be earned through gameplay, but only at an agonizingly slow pace. If you wanted them faster, they had to be purchased outright with real money. When it came to the competitive multiplayer battles, the disparity became glaringly obvious. Players who had invested real money into maxing out their held items up to level 30 gained a substantial edge over those who didn't. Their combat power had been drastically boosted, making them overpowered compared to everyone else. The matches were dominated by those who paid, with the imbalance so pronounced that some prominent YouTubers showcased just how easily they could crush opponents after maxing out their items with cash. Naturally, all of this could only end one way. Fans flooded forums and social media accusing Pokémon Unite of being pay-to-win. These predatory monetization tactics had destroyed what could have been a fun game. The app was obviously designed to push players toward microtransactions. Even as developers introduced updates to mitigate the play-to-win perception, it didn't work. Many players had already walked away to play the more reliable Pokémon games for free. Jinx's racial controversy. In 1999, Carol Boston Weatherford, an African-American cultural critic, published a scathing article about Pokémon and its questionable depiction of race. At the heart of the article was one of the original Pokémon introduced in Red and Blue, Jynx. Jynx's design was humanoid, featuring jet black skin, oversized pink lips, and large eyes. All traits that mirrored offensive racial stereotypes common in minstrel shows and other racist imagery from the 19th and 20th centuries. Combined with its exaggerated movements, such as hip wiggling described as seductive in early Pokédex entries, Jynx's portrayal felt uncomfortably close to those kinds of stereotypical, harmful depictions. And that's exactly what Weatherford was calling out. She compared Jynx to the racist caricatures in the story of Little Black Sambo, and even to drag queen stereotypes, and she quickly found a lot of support online. Complaints poured in from parents and advocacy groups, forcing Nintendo and Game Freak to confront the allegedly unintended consequences of their design choices. Every episode of the anime featuring Jynx were pulled from international syndication or heavily edited, while toys and merchandise featuring the character were quietly discontinued. By the time Pokémon Gold and Silver were localized for Western audiences, Jynx's design had been altered entirely, recoloring her skin to purple to distance her from blackface comparisons. Even today, Jynx remains a polarizing figure within the franchise because many can never forget her origins. Pokémon Lenora's design controversy. Pokémon Black and White was a pretty bold move for the Pokémon series, introducing something the franchise hadn't really seen much of before now: diversity. The game was going to feature the first black female gym leader in the series, a milestone for the franchise. But her initial appearance drew criticism for its unsettling resemblance to the mammy stereotype, a caricature rooted in slavery-era depictions of African-American women. This extremely offensive stereotype featured exaggerated features, aprons, and headscarves, portraying black women as submissive, cheerful domestic servants. Lenora's design included a pink apron, bandana-style hair tie, and bright lips, all elements that unintentionally echoed this harmful stereotype. The backlash was swift, especially from Western audiences familiar with the history of this kind of imagery. They noted that the apron made her look more maternal in a way that felt reductive rather than empowering. Her Japanese title, Natural Born Mama, made it all feel even worse. Even though the designers clearly meant to convey nurturing qualities, its implications were impossible to ignore in places like the United States, where systemic racism and historical violence against black communities have been a problem pretty much since the country's inception. Game Freak quickly responded by altering Lenora's design for international audiences. In the updated artwork, the apron was repositioned over her shoulder like a cape to try and distance her from the mammy stereotypes. In the English dub of the anime episodes featuring Lenora, the apron was removed entirely and replaced with a buttoned shirt and pants. But despite these changes in other media, Lenora's in-game sprites retained her original design in all versions of Pokémon Black and White, making it impossible to fully get away from the controversy. Pokémon anime episode bans. The Pokémon anime has aired for decades, largely without any problems, but 2 episodes were banned internationally due to their controversial content. Beauty and the Beach starts as a lighthearted episode about a beach beauty contest, but it quickly takes a turn into some uncomfortable territory when Misty, a 10-year-old, enters the contest to help a struggling restaurant owner. James, one of Team Rocket's villains, cross-dresses in a bikini with inflatable breasts, using them to mock Misty's physique. At one point, he inflates them further, taunting her with the line, "When you're older, you'll have a chest like this." Again, Misty is 10 years old. This scene alone was enough to raise alarms for Western censors, but that wasn't all. Other moments included subliminal imagery of Misty in a bikini with Pikachu holding a sign reading "Japan's #1 best," and an older man making suggestive comments about Misty's future appearance. The episode was heavily edited for later releases, but its original version remains infamous among fans. The Legend of Dratini presented an entirely different kind of controversy. Set in the Safari Zone, the episode introduced firearms into the Pokémon world in a way that shocked audiences. The elderly warden of the Safari Zone repeatedly brandishes a revolver, pointing it directly at Ash's head and even threatening to shoot him if he dares to break the rules. He's not kidding. The warden fires at Team Rocket during their antics, proving that he might actually go as far as to kill them. While these scenes were intended as slapstick humor in Japan, they were deemed way too dark for children in other regions. The episode's ban created a lasting plot hole for Western viewers. Ash catches 30 Tauros during this adventure, but because the episode never aired outside of Japan, there's no reason given for why or how he has them in the next episode. Pokémon Go Spying Conspiracy. In 2016, Pokémon Go launched and became an instant sensation all over the world. But while most people were more than happy to run around catching virtual creatures, others had some major questions about the nature of the app and its attitude toward privacy and surveillance. The app required constant access to the user's location data, cameras, and even their Google accounts, raising serious concerns about how this data was being collected and used. But Niantic, the game's developer, had ties to John Hanke, a former Google executive whose earlier company Keyhole was funded by In-Q-Tel, which just happens to be the CIA's venture capital arm. So, you can see how the speculation quickly ran wild, with many thinking the game was a covert tool for mass surveillance. The conspiracy theories spiraled quickly from there, leading to the belief that Pokémon Go was a government-backed operation to gather geospatial intelligence. Let me explain this in simpler terms. The idea was that players were unknowingly mapping sensitive areas by chasing digital creatures, their phone cameras capturing GPS-tagged images of homes, businesses, and even restricted sites. Intelligence agencies could spawn rare Pokémon in specific locations to lure players into photographing these spaces, giving them key information without ever having to go there. Yeah, it's a creepy idea. Of course, Niantic denied all of those claims, but the app's terms of service allowed sharing user data with law enforcement or government officials under certain circumstances, which didn't help. Before long, governments worldwide grew wary. Russia labeled the game a CIA plot, Indonesia and Egypt warned players against entering sensitive sites, while the US military banned its personnel from playing near classified facilities. No evidence of spyware was ever found, but the potential risk was too high for many to buy into. In 2025, Saudi Arabia's Royal Investment Fund acquired Niantic's gaming division. Given Saudi Arabia's history of using surveillance tools against dissidents and journalists, many now believe the government may be somehow using or misusing the sensitive user data the company gathered from the game. We just don't know. Pokémon gambling. The Pokémon franchise is not immune to darker themes in its work, and one of the undercurrents of the earliest games is pretty inappropriate for the young audience the games are marketed to. I'm talking, of course, about gambling. From the original Pokémon Red and Blue to later entries like Fire Red and Diamond and Pearl, the series featured game corners where players could engage in slot machines to earn in-game currency. Like most things in the Pokémon world, these mechanics were simple but highly addictive, offering players the thrill of risk and reward. For children, the allure was undeniable. The bright visuals, celebratory sounds, and the promise of rare items created a feedback loop that kept them coming back for more. Basically, it was Pokémon Vegas. The game corners were central to gameplay, sometimes offering exclusive Pokémon or powerful items as rewards. Players could spend hours spinning reels, hoping for a jackpot. And while it seemed harmless on the surface given the lack of real currency, many parents began to question whether this was normalizing gambling behaviors in impressionable young players. The mechanics mirrored real-life slot machines very closely, placing bets, pulling levers, and watching reels spin in anticipation. It was raising some serious alarms about how such exposure is the kind of thing that might shape attitudes toward gambling later in life. As the global scrutiny intensified, gaming regulatory bodies like PEGI and ESRB introduced stricter guidelines. By 2009, games with simulated gambling were required by law to carry higher age ratings. Well, obviously, that was a problem for Pokémon developers. Maintaining these features would push the game into a less family-friendly category and basically force out their target audience. In response, Nintendo began phasing out the game corners entirely. Slot machines were replaced with tamer minigames or removed altogether, ensuring they could keep being family-friendly and not promote unhealthy addictions. No direct link to real-world gambling was proven, but the ethical implications were clear. Children's games should not include gambling elements. Saudi Arabia Pokémon ban. In 2001, Saudi Arabia's Grand Mufti, Sheikh Abdulaziz Al-Sheikh, introduced a fatwa banning the Pokémon franchise. At the time, the Pokémon brand could not have been bigger worldwide, a global phenomenon of trading cards and video games. But here, the franchise was condemned as un-Islamic by the kingdom's highest religious authority. The reasoning was that Pokémon allegedly promoted gambling, evolution, and polytheism, all concepts forbidden in Islam. The fatwa claimed the franchise encouraged belief in Darwin's theory of evolution through its mutations, and accused the franchise of promoting gambling due to its card game mechanics. Even the symbols on the cards were scrutinized by Islamic officials, with clerics alleging they represented Zionism, Christianity, and Freemasonry. The six-pointed star, for instance, was said to symbolize the State of Israel and international Zionism. It was a reach, to say the least. But the ban wasn't just theoretical. Pokémon merchandise was swiftly removed from stores, shipments blocked at ports, and schools set up collection points for children to surrender their Pokémon paraphernalia or face the consequences. Rumors spread like wildfire, with some claiming the word Pikachu translated to "I am Jewish" despite its Japanese origins. Others alleged the franchise was a Jewish conspiracy to distract Muslim children from their faith. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the rumors, obviously. Years later, when Pokémon Go launched in 2016, the fatwa was revived stronger than ever. The game brought players into public spaces to catch virtual creatures, but in Saudi Arabia, it was once again a reminder of gambling and polytheism betraying Islamic principles. 3 men were arrested at Jeddah Airport for playing Pokémon Go near a restricted area, a highly dangerous crime in this part of the world. Pokémon clearly had no place in Saudi Arabia. Level 6. The Pokémon trading card craze leading to violence. The Pokémon trading card craze of the late 1990s was a cultural phenomenon, but what many people forget is that it quickly spiraled into chaos, with violence becoming a disturbing undercurrent, mostly among children. The aggression was fueled by the scarcity and immense value of first edition holographic cards, particularly the coveted Charizard. Tensions would boil over in schoolyards and retail stores over who got to have these special cards. You see, these cards weren't just collectibles. They were status symbols and currency among these kids, and they would do anything to get them. Kids would argue over perceived unfair deals, and disagreements could escalate into physical fights that would often lead to bullying or intimidation as children were forced into handing over their rare cards. The desperation to complete collections or secure prized holographics led to what authorities described as aggressive trading, with police in the US even labeling Pokémon cards as America's most dangerous hobby after a surge in crimes. At one point, 6 children in Philadelphia were arrested for assault tied to Pokémon cards. And adults were no better. Scalpers and collectors often clashed in stores, shoving and snatching packs from each other in chaotic scenes reminiscent of Black Fridays. Thieves broke into shops or even crashed vehicles into storefronts to steal boxes of cards. And retailers couldn't do anything about it. They instituted purchase limits, but they were useless. Too many people wanted to catch 'em all. Pokémon Sleep's privacy concerns. Pokémon Sleep launched with an innocent premise. Gamify sleep, reward rest, and let Pokémon fans wake up to Snorlax-powered progress. Who could possibly say no to that? But behind the adorable, colorful veneer, privacy concerns reared their ugly head as per usual. The app requires users to place their smartphones by their beds overnight, using microphones to record sounds and accelerometers to track movements. This data is then processed to categorize sleep patterns, dozing, snoozing, slumbering, and reward players with Pokémon based on their sleep quality. But the really creepy thing is that the app's audio recording feature doesn't just track snoring or sleep talking, it captures all nighttime noises, including conversations or even farts, raising questions about the extent of its surveillance. Some users tried to opt out of audio recording only to find that the process was extremely drawn out and difficult, while many felt coerced into granting microphone access to fully utilize the app's features. For parents, the app's lack of age restrictions made their concerns even more intense. Children could freely use the app without parental consent, violating European GDPR regulations. Not something that made anyone feel comfortable. But then we come to the biggest concern of all, the connection between Pokémon Sleep and Niantic Labs, a company with a history of aggressively collecting user data through apps like Pokémon Go. As I said earlier in this video, Niantic's privacy policies have sparked outrage for requesting excessive permissions, such as full access to Google accounts during Pokémon Go's early days. With Pokémon Sleep, users worried their sleep data might be monetized or repurposed for broader studies without explicit consent, and there was simply no way for them to know. Level 7. The danger of Pokémon toys. In late 1999, Burger King launched a massive promotion tied to Pokémon the First Movie, distributing over 25 million plastic Pokéball containers along with kids' meals. Each ball, designed to hold one of 57 collectible Pokémon toys, could be pulled apart into two halves. But what seemed like harmless fun turned deadly just weeks after the campaign began. On December 11, 1999, tragedy struck in Sonora, California. 13-month-old Kira Alexis Murphy was left in her playpen with a Burger King Pokeball toy. Of course, being a baby, her instinct was to try to eat it. When one half of the Pokeball became stuck over her nose and mouth, the airtight seal it created suffocated her before she could be rescued. Her mother returned from a shower to find Kira unresponsive, the ball still covering her face. The Tuolumne County Sheriff's Department quickly issued a warning about the containers, but the damage was done. Despite this horrific incident, Burger King initially resisted recalling the toys, insisting they complied with federal safety standards. But 10 days after Kira's tragic death, another close call occurred in Kansas. An 18-month-old girl had a Pokeball half stuck to her face. Her father managed to pull it off only after her lips had turned blue. Public pressure mounted, and Burger King finally announced a total recall on December 27, 1999. The recall was one of the largest in history, with over 25 million Pokeballs pulled from circulation. But even with these widespread warnings and destruction efforts, the danger persisted. On January 25, 2000, 4-month-old Zachary Jones suffocated in his crib after a Pokeball became lodged on his face. These deaths exposed a fatal design flaw. The ball halves were perfectly sized to create a deadly vacuum seal on small children's faces. Despite passing safety tests, they proved lethal under real-world conditions. Pokémon Go tragedies. The 2016 release of Pokémon Go brought a brand new blend of augmented reality fun and real-world exploration. People all over the world were out looking for Pokémon, but this popularity came with some unfortunate consequences. Players too engrossed in the hunt for virtual creatures often ignored their surroundings, leading to a series of tragic incidents worldwide. In Maryland, a man crashed his SUV into a parked police car because he was distracted by the game. The impact was caught on the officer's body camera, forcing the driver to admit to playing Pokémon Go at the time of the incident. In Japan, 2 separate fatalities occurred within weeks. A farmer struck 2 pedestrians while playing, killing one and injuring another, and another driver hit a cyclist while attempting to recharge his phone mid-game. A study estimated that Pokémon Go contributed to over 150,000 traffic accidents and 256 deaths in its first 5 months in the US, with many crashes occurring near Pokestops where drivers stopped abruptly or played behind the wheel. In San Diego, 2 men fell off a cliff while chasing Pokémon near a fenced-off 90-foot bluff. One plummeted 50 feet, the other fell all the way to the beach below. Both survived but suffered serious injuries. In Wyoming, a teenager stumbled upon a corpse while searching for water Pokémon along a riverbank. By now, it's pretty obvious that the game is responsible for some seriously messed up stuff, but all of these incidents happened entirely by chance, which means that criminals took advantage of the situation. In Missouri, armed robbers used Pokémon Go's lure module feature to attract victims to secluded areas before robbing them at gunpoint. Elsewhere, players were ambushed and mugged while distracted by their screens. In one case, a man in Anaheim was stabbed while playing in a park, unaware of his surroundings. The incidents just kept coming. To date, 25 people have died and another 63 injured as a result of playing Pokémon Go. Pokémon causes seizures in 600 children. On December 16, 1997, the Pokémon anime aired an episode that would become infamous for its unintentionally catastrophic impact. Titled Electric Soldier Porygon, the episode was broadcast across 37 stations in Japan at the height of the franchise's popularity. 20 minutes into the episode, Pikachu unleashed a thunderbolt attack that detonated missiles in a virtual world. The explosion was depicted with rapid, alternating flashes of red and blue light at a frequency of 12 flashes per second for 6 seconds. It immediately sparked an unprecedented health crisis. Within hours, hospitals across Japan were overwhelmed as over 600 children arrived suffering from seizures, convulsions, vomiting, and even temporary blindness. Japanese news outlets dubbed the event Pokémon Shock, an incident that affected people nationwide. And it wasn't just epilepsy sufferers who were affected. Many of the children had no prior history of photosensitive epilepsy. The sheer number of cases was totally unexpected, raising questions about how such a widespread reaction could occur from one cartoon. TV Tokyo immediately pulled the episode from circulation, and Pokémon went on a 4-month hiatus while medical experts and animators investigated the disaster. The flashing lights were soon identified as the culprit, with the red lighting being particularly harmful, something animators could never have foreseen. New broadcasting guidelines were introduced to prevent similar incidents, including restrictions on strobe effects and rapid color transitions. Despite Pikachu being responsible for the triggering scene, Porygon bore the brunt of public blame. The character was effectively blacklisted from future episodes and merchandise, becoming a scapegoat for the whole thing. To this day, Electric Soldier Porygon remains officially banned worldwide. If you still want more disturbing video game content, why not check out this video on disturbing Roblox controversies?